and this would be our 17th world championship victory, which that alone, I don't know if that'll ever be matched. This will solidify that heavyweight. I don't think people are going to look back and say how great Ciryl Gane was, unfortunately. But there's no doubt they'll look back and say what a great heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic was, especially with wins over Nagano and Cormier. And this is going to be, Jon's never got to fight in New York City before. So Jon in Madison Square Garden, this has been a 1.5 year long build up for this fight. I think there's so many elements of it that are going to be checked to just make it a very special night in Madison Square Garden. And I can't wait.
He is one of the top coaches in all of mixed martial arts. On November 16th, he returns to the cage once again with the GOAT, the greatest of all time, Jon Jones, defending his heavyweight title against Stipe Miocic, UFC 309. It is always my great pleasure to speak to Brandon Gibson. Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited about this big fight, Damon.
Absolutely. I think we've all been anticipating this for a while. I know I've said this to you in interviews in the past, but I was lucky enough to attend a lot of Jon Jones fights, and I always take that as something special because there's going to come a time when Jon Jones isn't fighting anymore. So I know you work with a lot of guys, but is it always special when it's weeks away from Jon Jones fighting for you?
Yeah, Jon's the guy I started with. There's nobody I've cornered or taken that walk with as many times as Jon. So I've just been embracing every practice of this camp, every study session, every mitt session, every training, and really just making the most out of it. I never take any of this for granted. I know I'm very privileged and fortunate to get to work with the greatest of all time, but this one's extra special for me.
How tough was it? I know, I think we spoke, maybe it was a couple weeks before the injury happened with last year with the pectoral muscle. And obviously, listen, this is part of the sport, injuries happen, but how tough was that just inside the camp to be that close to go time and then have such a devastating injury happen that, legitimately knocked him out for about a year? That's just literally worst case scenario.
Yeah, it was brutal. It was really hard, obviously, to see Jon in physical pain. It was hard to be so prepared to fight, the legendary Stipe Miocic, to be so close from Madison Square Garden, the build up, the anticipation, the sacrifice that we'd all put in. But, we just trust in God and know that this is all part of the plan. And I will say that Jon looks better right now than he did 2 weeks out before that last Stipe fight that we were scheduled for. And even on fight day for Ciryl Gane. So I'm very, very excited to see this heavyweight version of Jon Jones this November of 2024.
I think what's scariest about Jon is when you give him time to prepare, real time to prepare. He's a very scary individual. Again, I say this, I say this constantly. He's the greatest of all time for a reason. But obviously even going into that Ciryl Gane fight, he had been preparing for heavyweight. But now you've had basically almost 2 years of him being a heavyweight. Would you imagine now going into this fight, this is a better heavyweight Jon Jones than we saw against Ciryl Gane or what we would have seen against Stipe last year? Because he's like a chemist in there. You give him more time to work and it's just going to get bad for everybody else.
Well, that's 100% true. He is getting stronger, faster, more skilled at heavyweight. Early on to make that jump from light heavyweight to get up to heavyweight was putting on a lot of size, a lot of mass. And now his body's gotten very accustomed to that size. You saw his recent photo, how lean he's getting for heavyweight. And then we've just assembled this super team of training partners and coaches. So, Jon's the greatest student in the game as well. So he's always learning. And I think he's already the most dangerous heavyweight there is. And now you add in this plethora of new tools. Oh, it's just terrifying. He would be a nightmare to coach against because there's no path to victory against Jon Jones.
Yeah. Can I ask, listen, listen, I understand you never live with regrets, and Jon did so much, so many great things. He's clearly the best light heavyweight that ever did it, but seeing how good he's gotten now and doing it, is there any small part that's man, I kind of wish we'd done heavyweight a couple years earlier? Because legitimately, I'm certainly not knocking those last couple wins light heavyweight, but you think right now, again, the record for most heavyweight title defenses is 3. It's not a lot. like he could be on 5 or 6. Is there any small party? It's like, man, I kind of wish we had done this a couple years earlier.
Oh, sure. Like you said, his accolades at light heavyweight are, I don't know if anybody's ever going to break that streak of title defenses. Um, but with that said, I think there were some great heavyweights of kind of the era before that we missed out on fighting. I would love to see Jon against Brock Lesnar, against Junior Dos Santos, against so many of the greats at heavyweight. It would have been fun to see how Jon mixed it up with those guys as well.
Do you remember back in the day, this is going back years ago, when him and Cain Velasquez did like a fun face-off at a press conference? And I still look at that photo, I'm like, man, that's the one. Because, like, again, injuries aside, I think Cain may have been the most talented heavyweight. Unfortunately, injuries kind of ruined his career. But I always think back at that moment, like, man, what a big fight that would have been. Again, it's just the sport. It didn't happen. But that's the one that always, like, that's the one that got away.
Yeah, and obviously Francis, right? Like, and maybe there's still a potential with Francis down the road. Who knows? I'm never going to count that one out. But yeah, there's been some great UFC heavyweights that I think Jon's skill set, even a couple of years ago, where his frame might not have been ready to be at that heavyweight peak, just his skill set alone, I think Jon could beat any of these guys.
Yeah, I hope I'm not asking you to give away any secrets. Do you know, like, what around Jon? Because you mentioned Jon looks a little leaner. What is he weighing right now? Do you have, like, a general idea what he's weighing right now?
I'll say he's over 206 and less than 265.
would
He's
you
in
would
the
you
heavyweight range, man. He's in the heavyweight range.
would you say he's in better heavyweight shape now though than what we saw him in? And again, I mean, he tore through Cyril Gahn, who's one of the best heavyweights in the world. I'm certainly not saying he wasn't in shape, but do you feel like he's in better heavyweight shape now than he was even then?
Absolutely. Jon's just in his cardio, his strength, his skill set, the way he's firing off everything. It's incredible right now. And I'm just fingers crossed that, Stipe gets to the fight safely. I know we will get to the fight safely, and we're ready for it.
What do you make? And again, your focus is on Jon and getting him ready, but you've been around the sport, you know the sport very, very well. What do you make of what I've kind of perceived as almost like disrespect to Stipe, that like people are just like, oh, Stipe does it, he shouldn't be in there, this shouldn't be the fight, Jon's gonna roll through him, Jon's the biggest favorite, blah 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 blah. And listen, I think a lot of people are going to pick Jon Jones, and rightfully so, because he's Jon Jones. I'll say right now, like, Jon Jones could fight anybody, and I would pick him to win because I think he's the greatest of all time. But there seems to be a real, like, almost like a disconnect between people remembering what Stipe was, and somehow a couple years later, he's not that same guy anymore.
Sometimes the sport has a short memory, unfortunately. But especially as like we film study for this fight, to see Stipe's been in dog fights. He's been in one-sided dominating performances. He could be the aggressor moving forward, like we saw in the second Junior Dos Santos fight. He could be punching off his back foot, like we see in the Verdum fight. He could be very strategic and stick to the game plan, like we saw in the first Francis Ngannou fight. I mean, Stipe has it all. He can punch, he can kick, he can wrestle. He has great physical endurance. And we know we're going out there to fight the greatest UFC heavyweight champion of all time, and we're preparing for it as such.
I like, because Jon is so masterful at just picking apart his opponents and beating them where they're great at. Like, if you would have said going into the Daniel Cormier fight, he's going to toss Daniel Cormier, a two-time Olympian, around and basically out-grapple him, out-wrestle him in those moments, a lot of people say you're crazy, but that's Jon Jones. Jon Jones has an ability to take your best weapon and turn it against you. I said, and this is going back years ago, I said, man, if heavyweight ever happens, I think Stipe would be the most interesting matchup, because Stipe is big, tall, great wrestling, huge power in his hands, doesn't kick a lot, so he doesn't give up a lot of takedowns and things like that. Is that kind of the fun dynamic of a fight like this? Because on paper, you would say Stipe is one of the more difficult fights at heavyweight versus some of the other guys. And I think that's what makes this beyond his accolades, like in terms of his style, like if you're going to pick a style that'd be fun for Jon to have to dissect and pick apart, it is a guy like Stipe, because Stipe does have those weapons that kind of match Jon in certain areas.
For sure. And he's a dog, right? Like, we've seen Stipe come back in fights, and that, he's proven himself in those championship rounds. He doesn't fade. he's as tough as they come. And even, the knockout in the second Francis Ngannou fight, like Stipe was wobbled and still punching. Like, that man is dangerous at all times. He's willing to go out on the shield. And to me, that's a much scarier matchup than, maybe like a young prospect who's never made it out of the first round.
Yeah, and this is, let's be honest, I think we all kind of see the writing on the wall. This is probably Stipe's final fight. He's coming back because it's a chance to fight the GOAT. He's the GOAT heavyweight. It's the GOAT of all time. I know when you say nothing to lose, everyone's got something to lose. No one wants to go in there and get knocked out. But he knows, like, I got to imagine Stipe is pouring everything, every ounce of what he's got left in his career into this moment because he knows there's no bigger, better way to go out than to say, I beat Jon Jones and retired as UFC heavyweight champion. So, like, in a weird way, I think that actually makes him more dangerous because he's not looking to what happened 6 months down the road or a year down. He's looking at this as my moment to pull off an upset and beat the greatest of all time and go out on that kind of a win. I mean, to me, that's a dangerous guy.
Absolutely. Very dangerous, right? All of his championship experience, his accolades, where he's at in his career, what he's accomplished. He has nothing left to prove except to, and so him taking this fight shows us that he's here to win. And we're taking it very seriously. We've been preparing so hard for this bout. We take it so seriously. And you're going to see the best Jon Jones because we have so much respect for Stipe.
I know you've probably answered some version of this question, and I probably asked you this the last time we spoke before the last fight was scheduled, and I'm certainly not going to ask you to betray any confidence because I know what you tell me now is not what you and Jon are talking about privately. But because we all know, like, the stories out there, is this going to be Jon's final fight? Like, Jon has been very open to say, like, he knows there's limited time left in his career. And much like Stipe, Jon can retire tomorrow and he's the greatest of all time. He doesn't need to do anything else. He can say, you know what, I decided I don't want to fight at UFC 310 or 309. I'm walking away. Okay, you're still the greatest of all time. But in your head, like, when you're just getting ready for November 16th that day, but is there a chance this is the last time we see Jon, or when you're training him, or you still decide, like, I think he's still got a couple more in him?
Oh, I think physically, mentally, he could go in there and have 5 or 6 more great performances. But like you said, Damon, there's nothing left for Jon to prove. I think he really wants this fight with Stipe. I think this fight will help solidify Jon's status as that great heavyweight champion. But it's not something we talk about every night at the gym. We're definitely, all eyes on November 16th. But each time I go to a practice, I'm approaching it as this is my last camp. So I'm giving it my all. And you know what? If we get 1 more after this, if we get 2 more, man, that would be a great blessing. But I'm also ready to see Jon hang it up, put the belt up. Yeah. I'm always funny. I'd prefer them to walk away, obviously, earlier than later. And out of all the fighters, Jon deserves to walk away, like you said, anytime he wants. So I'm always going to support those guys. There's never any pressure on me, like, oh, we got to fight one more time. We got to fight this next number 1 contender, because there's always going to be a next number 1 contender. There's never a perfect time to walk out. Somebody will always say, they'll hold it, but you didn't fight that guy. Just, to me, it doesn't matter. So whenever Jon's ready, I'm right there with him. But yeah, I'm approaching this one like it's our last rodeo.
It's funny you say that. You literally stole my question because, listen, I think, and I've talked to him, I think Tom Aspinall is an incredible fighter. I think he's an incredible heavyweight and incredible champion. But this is the nature of our sport, right? It's always the next guy. Like 2 years ago, Jon had to fight Francis. If he doesn't fight Francis, he's not the guy. Francis is the scariest guy on the earth. But now suddenly Francis is not in the UFC, and now it's Tom Aspinall. Tom Aspinall, scariest guy on there. This is our sport, right? Like, this is the nature of the beast. Like, when he was a light heavyweight, oh, you got to fight Dominic Reyes, you got to fight that guy, you got to fight. There's never going to be an end to this, right? If you just say the next guy, because let's say he goes out there and wipes out Tom Aspinall, then the next they're going to say, well, what about this guy? That's just the sport. I think Tom Aspinall is incredible, but that's just, we can keep going all day and say, well, this guy and that guy, and that's just how we go. Like, it's not disrespect to Tom Aspinall. It's just the reality of he's the next guy, and there's always going to be a next guy.
Yeah, and 10 years from now, we'll have all the generational talks, like how would Ali have done against Tyson? Right? How would a Tyson done against Tyson Fury? There's always going to be those types of discussions that will come down the road too. So always a lot of what ifs in this game. But what I do know is November 16th, we'll be staring across the stage, across the octagon from Stipe and his great team. And, that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, it's so funny because that we so rarely get to see guys go out on top in this sport, and it's almost like there's this weird disconnect with people where John has a chance to beat Stipe Miocic, the greatest, at worst, the greatest UFC heavyweight. You could argue the greatest heavyweight of all time, period. Go out as champion, retire as the greatest of all time, two division. I mean, again, all these things he's gonna, all these things he can rack up on November 16th. And we think of like two or three people in the sport. George St. Pierre being a case of a guy who went out on top. Khabib Nurmagomedov who went out on top. Why do we like? I just don't understand. Like we got to be able to let these guys go. And I want to have a good memory of John going out. I certainly don't want to have. You've seen the sport. You've seen guys who stick around too long. And I don't know that John would ever be that way. But I think John respects his legacy enough to never be that way. Like I think Anderson Silva is incredible. We can't ignore how Anderson's UFC career ended. You just can't. Like, you can't ignore that. And I think we should root for guys to go out on top.
Absolutely. And, from a fan perspective, I guess sometimes it's like the solidifying of passing the torch, right? It makes for that lineal champion. But, somebody that's, John's been sacrificing his body for this game for a long time, and he's earned it.
Now, I know, obviously you work with a lot of great coaches. You work primarily with the striking, but I saw last week, I posted so many photos on Twitter about it because I was so excited. He was working with Gable Steveson, who is one of my favorite guys. I love Gable, Olympic gold medalist. I think he would have won a second gold medal had he gotten in the Olympics this last year. And then obviously I know he also works with Gordon Ryan, who's been a guy he's worked with, a little bit here and there. And I know he's also done. What is that? Listen, I know you guys always have a plethora of guys coming in there, and it's always like an embarrassment of riches. But you bring in arguably the greatest American wrestler and the greatest American grappler. Now, again, I know you work primarily on the striking side, but what is that room like when you're seeing John grapple with Gable Steveson or grappling with Gordon Ryan? That's just a ridiculous scene to me.
It is, and although I may be a striking coach, I'm an MMA coach first and foremost, right? Like I'm not teaching pure boxers out there. I'm an MMA coach, so I also it's just so great to see like the best American wrestler, the best American grappler, and these guys are so humble, and everybody's there with this common goal because they see the greatness in Jon Jones. And in the week prior, we also had the WBO champ, Joseph Parker in town. So it is like a who's who in the most hood gym in the middle of nowhere, Albuquerque. When you pull up at night and go into that room, and there's so much knowledge on that mat. There's so much Bushido, that warrior spirit on the mat. There's so much humility, and everybody's rallying around John to to lift him up, to watch him, chase and claim greatness once again.
You've worked with a lot of guys at their peak. You've also brought guys up from the very start. A guy I know you work with for many years. He's one of your main guys, Aaron Pico, who I have just a tremendous amount of respect for. I know this is probably a difficult question to answer because you're not his coach primarily, and also he's still very young. But when you see a guy like Gable Steveson, because I know Gable has talked about doing MMA, I've talked to him about it. It was when he coming out of the Olympics, he was basically either going WWE or going to UFC. He decided to do the WWE route. But when you look at a guy like that, can you see the raw talent and say, man, this guy, every time I see him, like when I saw him train with John, I freaked out. I was like, this guy would be such a good prospect. Again, I know he's probably not doing everything right now, but when you look at a guy like that, can you look at a Gable Steveson and say, yeah, I can see the potential there?
Oh, of course. Obviously to achieve that level of becoming an Olympic gold medalist, you have to be willing to make the sacrifice, have that dedication, have the skill set, have the IQ. Man, and he came in and he's like so humble and so friendly and so cool. And the sky's the limit for Gable. I mean, and he's a super athlete, right? Like he also walked onto the Buffalo Bills without ever playing football. So just in this past week, we've seen him in there, boxing, ripping mitts, grappling, doing jiu-jitsu, doing ground and pound drills. He's incredible. And I have no doubt that he could be a heavyweight champion. There's a sense of pride I see in Jon Jones actually having some of these young greats come into the room where John also wants to coach them and lift them up. And John's a heck of a teacher himself. So who knows, maybe Jon Jones will be coaching Gable Steveson to UFC heavyweight glory one day.
It's funny because guys who've worked with John, and I've talked to a lot of guys over the years, I don't think he gets enough credit for what kind of a mentor he is, because I know like he kind of takes guys under his wing in a way and like kind of coaches them up. He's done it for years. I know he's not out there promoting it and putting it on social media like I brought this guy up, but I know every person I've talked to that works with him says, man, he is a great mentor. He's a great person. He has a great, I mean, we all know he has a great mind for the sport, but passing that on, that means a lot to the next generation of fighters.
He's a great captain, Damon. You know, and we've built this team over the last 3 years around Jon, but Jon also gives back to the entire team, and that's the coaching staff, that's the training partners, that's all the special guests that come through, and it's really great to see Jon in this phase, this chapter he's in right now, because he shares so much knowledge, and it's just MMA. Sometimes it's just life, and you know, he's a true friend to all of us as well. So it's a great brotherhood at the end of the night to be on those mats. It's special because not every gym I've been a part of or every team I've been a part of has had that element. You know, where we're all done with practice, we hold hands and pray together, we thank God. And then, you know, the guys are just there for each other, talking about life, their problems, their ups, their downs. And it's a real tight community.
I know it's a family. Every time I've ever talked to you guys, it's a family. You guys have dinners together. You spend holidays together. That it's not just a team; it is a family. I know that. I think that's always been very important to Jon. The people around him are like a family.
It's true. And, you know, it's a very close knit group. And then we have fun stuff too. Like the other night, we're getting done with practice and a taco truck pulls up and Jon's like, hey, I ordered a taco truck. Let's all grab some. You know, so it's just those elements too. It's nice being able to train with heavyweights where you could throw down 10 tacos that night. But it's a good time. It's a good team, a good brotherhood, good family.
Yeah. Now I know right now Jon is literally weeks away from a fight, so I know that's your primary focus. But can I ask you, because what we've seen now with Aaron Pico, a couple wins in a row. I know he hasn't fought since February. I think we're all looking at it's going to be. I think it's got to be the Patricio Pitbull fight next. I think I think we're finally seeing the true potential of Aaron Pico right now.
Yeah, Pico just needed a little time, right? I, I can't say enough about Aaron Pico. He is so dedicated. He's so focused. He will be a champion. I have no doubt about that. And, you know, we're just waiting. You know, the PFL Bellator merger has been great in a lot of ways, but also like we need more activity. You know, we saw Aaron put on a great performance against Corrales in February. He's dominating. We've been waiting for the Pitbull fight. Aaron's willing to take on all challenges at any time, and I feel like he's on the phone every week with his management saying, I'm ready, put me in, let's go. So, you know, Damon, we're working towards that fight with Pitbull. I'm training him for a 5-round championship fight against one of the greatest 145ers of all time. And I just can't wait till we get that contract, we get the call, we get to make that walk. And Aaron Pico's gonna get that belt wrapped around his waist.
It's wild to think about because he came into a situation unlike any. I mean, even like I remember when Jon debuted in the UFC and he fought a guy named Andre Guzman, who I had seen fight in another organization, IFL, and he had this crazy capoeira style, and I was like, man, Guzman seems like a real good prospect. Of course, Jon Jones comes in there, wrecks him, and then Jon Jones goes on. So most guys don't come in with that kind of hype. Aaron Pico did. Aaron Pico came in day one, and that's a lot of pressure to live up to. He had to take time to develop, and now I think we are actually seeing the true potential of Aaron Pico. He just had a spotlight on him that most guys just do not have as 0-0 fighters.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's also in some ways like a cautionary tale on how do you build up a fighter. You know, I think his past coaches fast tracked him in a way. I think they saw so much potential, so much talent, so much skill set which he possesses. But you know, a lot of building up a fighter is getting them comfortable in the cage, making that walk, getting those rounds. And then, you know, when Aaron came to me and Greg Jackson, we really saw that. Not that Aaron fought a lower caliber of opponent, but we just took a different approach to it. And now you've seen Aaron go on this crazy tear. I mean, really since joining us and putting in full camps, you know, the shoulder injury aside, he's been undefeated with us. And we've just seen all finishes. So it makes me really happy to see the work Aaron's doing now, how much he's matured, how much he's gained in the ring. And at this point, you know, he's 27. I think he's unstoppable. He's unstoppable. And we're going to see Aaron entering his prime now. And hopefully PFL and Bellator can keep him busy enough to really showcase his skill set.
Absolutely. Does he get you on the horses? Every time I talk to him, I always got to say he gets more excited about the horses than he does fighting. Every time we do an interview, he's like way excited about the horses. So does he get you on the horses?
Yeah, I guess the last time I rode was 4th of July, so I need to get up there some more. But it's incredible to see his love and his passion for his horses, and also just, I mean, he's a gifted rider. His way to communicate with his horses is beautiful to watch, and it's such a stress decompressor for him. That's his safe place. That's where he can go and chill out, and he fits in perfectly well in New Mexico, riding his horses down these sequias.
I love it. I love it. Before I get you out of here, Brandon, listen, John, going back to Jon, Jon has had so many big moments in his career. I think back to, of course, the rematch with Alexander Gustafsson after they had such a close fight the first time and then just kind of vanquishing that demon, so to speak. You think about a guy like Daniel Cormier, who I think most people would say would be considered one of the greatest of all time, if not for Jon Jones in that division. And now, obviously, Daniel went on and created his own legacy, but there's just so much attached because of that rivalry. I know every fight's the biggest, right? Like every fight's the biggest, but Stipe Miocic being the greatest, like, is this kind of like a two-parter? Like it's like potentially the greatest threat because he is a heavyweight and he is all the things we talked about earlier. But in terms of accomplishment, this really does kind of put the last real check mark on. Again, I want to see Jon continue. Let me be clear about that. Like I love Jon. I don't want to see him go anywhere because I think he's the greatest. I'd love to see him fight more, but this is in a way kind of like the last great check mark on the list, really taking out the great heavyweight.
I think so. I think it really is. And this would be our 17th world championship victory, which that alone, I don't know if that'll ever be matched. This will solidify that heavyweight. I don't think people are going to look back and say how great Ciryl Gane was, unfortunately. But there's no doubt they'll look back and say what a great heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic was, especially with wins over Nagano and Cormier. And this is going to be, Jon's never got to fight in New York City before. So Jon in Madison Square Garden, this has been a 1.5 year long build up for this fight. I think there's so many elements of it that are going to be checked to just make it a very special night in Madison Square Garden. And I can't wait.
Jon's lived in Albuquerque for so long. I think people forget he's from New York. Like that's his home is New York. I think people forget because Albuquerque's become like his adopted home for so many years now, but he is a New Yorker. So, I mean, this has got to be a special moment to be able to walk out in Madison Square Garden. I was there for the first show when it was Conor and Eddie Alvarez, and like just the atmosphere of being in Madison Square Garden. I'm sure it's going to be even more special because he won high school wrestling tournaments in New York, things like that. So like going back there for this heavyweight title fight, I mean, in a way, it's almost like I know we would have loved to have seen Jon come back earlier, but like it kind of had to be this one, right? Like it kind of had to be this card.
It's poetic, yeah. And I think Jon could have been ready to fight earlier. I think he would have been ready over the summer, but New York is where we want to make that walk. And so I'm just grateful for the way everything's lined up, and we're just going to keep it on track. And I know it's going to be a very special night, November 16th.
And I know I don't get too deep. I never asked about game plan or anything like that, but Jon has had every kind of performance you can have. He's openly talked about the Gustafsson fight, like what he didn't do getting ready for that one. And then we saw the difference when he got ready and fought him in the rematch. We've seen him take on great wrestlers. We've seen him take on great strikers. We've seen him in the toughest moments. We've seen him absolutely roll through guys. When you look at Stipe, and again, you're prepared for a 5-round war where you need to go into that 5th round and win that 5th round to win the fight. But could this be another, when you look at this stylistically, could you be this another matchup where, I mean, I don't know that we saw the Ciryl Gane fight going that way. Like, I think a lot of people picked him. I didn't know it in that early, and I certainly don't think you're predicting this one to end that early. But do you think this could be another dominant Jon fight? Like, I feel like, in a way, because heavyweight's a little scarier, because bigger, stronger, faster, it's almost like, I feel like Jon's like, I don't even need to see a second round to give Stipe a second round. You know what I mean?
It's a very dangerous game, right? So if we can find a path towards victory, man, if anybody can take that path, it's Jon. We're also going to be well conditioned and prepared for 5 rounds, right? Like we've seen Stipe in these dog fights with Cormier and Junior Dos Santos just going the distance. But Jon approaches everything very tactically, right? And some of his greatest performances, like the second Cormier fight or the second Gustafsson fight, you see that patience in Jon. So, sometimes there's nothing to rush. If the opportunity presents itself for the finish, I know he'll take it. But he's not out there chasing or forcing anything. but I do see this fight not going to the judges, Damon. I think Jon's going to find a path to finish Stipe Miocic on November 16th.
I said this at the start, and I'll say it again now. When you get a chance to appreciate being around a legend, soak it in, because I think, like, there's part of me is like, man, I wish I had gone to more George St. Pierre fights, or I wish I had gone to more Khabib fights, because these are special moments, and I do hold this. Like, I was there the night Jon won the title against Mauricio Shogun Hua. I was there for a lot of the big nights for Jon for the DC fights. I'm saying this to you, but I'm saying it to the audience listening right now. Appreciate this, because if this really is the last one, soak it in, because you are about to witness greatness potentially for the last time. And I can't stress that enough, because these moments don't go. I will never get another Jon Jones. We may never get anyone even close to a Jon Jones. Like, what he's done in his career, if this really is the last one, it may be a decades before we get even anywhere close to this. So I'm just saying to everyone, appreciate this. And I know you do, because as you said, you're approaching this like it could be the last one. Soak it in. I know you will. I'm sure walking out and afterwards you'll soak it all in. But this really, like, this is special, because there is never going to be another Jon Jones.
No, there won't. And, I thank God that there is one. Man, I love this man, and I'm very excited to watch him just shine and show us all that greatness one more time. I'm happy to have a front row seat to it, Damon.
Can't wait. Well, Brandon, it's always a pleasure to catch up with you. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of the training camp. Safe travels, of course, out to New York. Cannot wait to see Jon back in action. He is the GOAT, and I can't wait to see him do GOAT things. Thank you as always for the time, Brandon. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Damon.